Welcome. This is our first workforce podcast, and it's for you. Make no mistake about it. This podcast is for you. If you've ever had a job, worked someplace, had a career, any of those kinds of things, this podcast is designed to help you. Now, some of what we'll share here are those crazy work stories, those oddball characters we work with, those bosses that we don't always like, and we will be sharing the times that myself and others that I interview have made mistakes and what that meant for the day, for the week, for their job, all of those kinds of things. We want to be truthfully honest in this podcast. That's why I just have a green screen behind me. No frills. Some episodes I might put something behind me, but the first one I wanted to show you that, hey, it's just me, the microphone, and the green screen. We're not going to sugarcoat things. We're not going to call people out or companies out. We're not going to do any name calling at all. We're just going to tell stories. And those stories are ones that you may have heard of. You may have heard from a friend or a family member, similar types of stories. We want to connect. We want transparency. We want authenticity. We want you to understand that we are going through the same things that you've gone through or a family member's gone through. And so that you or those people are not alone. And people do have similar experiences. Maybe you'll realize you know, that some of these stories uh, you have firsthand knowledge of. And we ask that you share your experience without naming names, whether it's a coworker, a boss, a colleague, a client, a company, any of those things. Just let us know how your story went. We want you to learn from this. I think every podcast episode will have something that you can learn from. We're going to start off this episode with something I think probably a lot of people have experienced, maybe in a small way, maybe in a large way. Hitting that send button on an email, or in my case, or in one of my cases, that send button on a fax. Believe it or not, I did work on faxes at one point. A little too soon. When you hit that send button too soon. Well, the first little story that I want to share with you is I was working at a big corporation and I was in charge of communications to employees and things like that, and I had been working with one of the top executives on a story that he wanted into this little newsletter that we put together, and I'd been working on it for about a week, writing it, editing it, getting feedback from him, feedback from my boss, all those kinds of things. And for whatever reason, and I can't quite remember it, I think it had something to do with one of the reviewers that kept sending separate emails, not on the email chain, if you will, but separate emails and separate documents and naming them different. And it got to a point where the executive sent me the final copy of the story that he reviewed. And for whatever reason, um, I had the second to last story queued up, ready to go in the newsletter, in the email newsletter. And I was so worried about getting that response that said, "Hey, everything looks great. Please send it out or send it out at 10:30, something like that. Hey, it's good to go for tomorrow morning." All of those kinds of things. Well, you know what it's like to finally you're sitting there waiting. At least I don't maybe not everybody, but with me, I'm sitting there waiting to find out what's going on. When I can hit send. I've been sitting on this and it's akin to watching paint dry, but it's a little bit more exciting. It's not quite the same, but you're waiting for that. It's okay. You can send it out. It's good to go. And as soon as I got that, it's good to go, I went bam. Uh-oh. Within about 7 minutes, I got an email back that went to my boss and myself that the email had the wrong quote in it from the executive, and the email that was sent was from that executive. Okay. Now, obviously, it was completely on me. It was completely something that in my line of setting everything up, I had everything close. Literally, there was at least 3, I wanna say 5 different versions of this letter that had to go in, and I hit send on the wrong one, and all I could do is respond and say, "You know what? It's completely my fault. I will see if I can retract any of these emails. Probably not. Once they go out, they're pretty much gone to a certain extent. Um, and I will resend it with a copy that, this needs to be updated, and we'll get, you know, that there was you know, that I'll make it right, essentially, is what I said. And you know what that executive did? Rather than coming over to my cubicle or the next time I saw him, calling me into his office, he actually responded to me and my boss and said, "You know what? I really appreciate your honesty. You took responsibility for that." And he goes, in a lot of places and with a lot of people, nobody does that anymore. And it's true. Everybody's so worried about covering their what, CYA, or keeping their jobs or keeping those things that they never want to just say, "Hey, look, it was me. I did it. I did it. I did it." And I don't know. I've always had that philosophy. I was raised that way. If you did something wrong, admit it and move on. And if the person can't, if it's a catastrophe, I totally understand. You go with the flow. You understand that, actions have consequences, but you take the responsibility for that. There's another case here too. Okay, this is a little bit more fun story. It doesn't involve me at all, but it involves someone I know. She was about ready to retire in, I believe it was a year, and for whatever reason, about a year before she was going to retire, she drafted her email retirement letter, and she wrote it. And then, a couple days later, she wanted to look it over again, see if there were any changes. Things kind of got slow in the office. She looked at it. Well, she proceeded to, tweak it a couple more times. And then something happened. It got busy. She got a bunch of emails. Maybe she was given something to do. I can't quite remember what the exact reasoning was, but she went like that to that email. And she retired about 51 weeks earlier than she had planned to because she hit send that early. Now everything's fine. I mean, it all worked out in the end. But when you start putting together your pension and all of these other kind of benefits that you would have for another, 11, 12 months, it shortened everything by that time period. And it's one of those reasons why I've always said, hey, before you hit it, slow down, check everything, then hit send. Okay, now to the facts portion. All right. I was working a job, and this was not too long out of college. Okay. So I was relatively green, and I was working on something, and I believe it was after 5 o'clock, and I was working on some things, and we had to get some information out to a group of people, my boss and I, to a group of people, and we had to send it via fax because email wasn't a thing. Yes, I admit I'm that old. Okay, I'm that old. I'm sure at some time I'll be talking about how sometimes I feel like there's a ageism in in jobs nowadays, but that's not for this episode. But so I was ready to send this fax out, and we wanted to make an announcement in the fax. We were announcing that there was going to be a public hearing on a certain date. Okay. Again, this podcast is not about calling out organizations or companies or people or anything like that. It's about my experiences, what I've heard, and then when I bring other people on, what their experiences are. So it was to announce a public hearing, and it was going to go to a group of people that were going to be interested in this public hearing. And so I was actually using a computer to send the fax. Okay, so it was close to being an email, but it wasn't quite an email yet. All right. I still don't even really remember the technology, to be honest with you. It was like a mass fax, but it wasn't, maybe it was an email that like would print it sort of as an early PDF or a picture or something like that. I'm assuming something like that. So it was just on the cusp of emails hitting it big in the mid to late 90s. And so it was a public hearing. No big deal. I hit send, and about 3 minutes after that, we get a call from one of the people who received it. We forgot to put the L in public. It was a pubic hearing. Oh, yeah. I mean, you only live once, right? Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll have another one next week. And please share any of your similar stories in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Take care. Have a great week.